Fairest of All, A Tale of the Wicked Queen by Serena Valentino. Copyright 2009, Disney Enterprises Incorporated, published by Disney Press. Chapter 22, The Crone, the Clearing, and the Cottage. The Queen packed the poison apple in a basket full of others. It was the sole red one, so that she would be able to identify it when the time came to use it. She gathered up the basket and lifted a trapdoor in the dungeon. She descended the hidden staircase that led to an underground passage, where long ago the king had helped the Queen and Snow White make a hasty and unseen exit from the castle during an attack. She hopped into the boat and rowed it down the underground river, which eventually opened up onto the castle moat, and finally into the swampland surrounding the forest. It was still dead of night, and she was sure she had gone unnoticed, a testament, she thought, to how poorly the castle guards did their job. The Queen sneaked through the swampland and out into the forest toward the 7 jeweled hills. But with her new form, a hunched body, and aching joints, it was not easy to navigate the uneven landscape, and she needed to stop often to rest. Then she came to a clearing that was bathed in what little moonlight had been able to penetrate the clouds. "Going off to do the deed, then?" she heard a voice. "Who's there?" the Queen asked, still not used to her own newly crotchety voice. 3 figures stepped out from the shadows. "You!" the Queen gasped. "You have chosen the right path," the sisters said. The Wicked Queen pushed them out of the way and proceeded, limping deeper into the forest. She had what she needed, their spells and their potions. She had no further use for them. "We hope you fare well," the sisters called after her as she continued her trek toward the 7 jeweled hills. It was after dawn before she finally reached them. She listened for the roar of the 7 falls and followed their path. She carefully avoided wild beasts and creatures of the night. She was forced to climb over felled trees in order to cross roaring rivers and streams, which in her frail state was not easy. But her determination was so strong, her will to kill Snow White so great, that she managed to arrive at the 7 jeweled hills. And just beyond them lay the cottage of the 7 dwarfs, and in it, Snow White. The Queen stood as tall as she could atop the hill, surveyed the landscape below. She noticed a worn little path that led into the woods. Chimney smoke hung over the treetops near where she suspected the path ended. The Queen threw back her head and laughed madly. Then she set out to follow the path. She was soon rewarded for her efforts. The Queen stood behind a tree and watched the little house, the door open, and the little men the slave had spoken of set off for their daily work in the mines. And then she saw her, Snow White. The girl had come to the door and saw each of the men off. The Queen was disgusted, filled with venom and hatred. Onyx hair, lips like rubies, skin like snow, heart of gold. Bah! The Queen knew better. Snow White was a selfish wench who cared nothing for her father's memory and was plotting to surpass her mother in the only thing the woman had left in this world, her beauty. The Queen watched as the men left the house. The sun was streaming through the canopy of bird-filled tree branches. Snow White proceeded to the garden, where she fed breadcrumbs to bluebirds. The Queen peeked from behind the tree where she was hiding. Her claw-like fingers wrapped around a low branch and made a sickening scratching sound as she dug her nails into the bark of the tree, wishing it were Snow White's flesh. "Hasn't changed one bit," she whispered to herself in a new raspy voice. She waited for Snow to go inside before she approached the cottage. She saw her in the open window happily at work making pies. The Queen quickly and suddenly thrust her head into the open window. "All alone, my pet?" she asked. Snow looked up from her work, clearly spooked by the sudden appearance of an old woman before her. "Why, yes, I am, but," the sweet girl answered. "The little men are not here?" the Queen asked. "No, they're not," Snow replied. The Queen leaned forward and sniffed around the cottage. "Making pies?" she asked. "Yes, gooseberry pies." Sweet, sickening. Time to die. "It's apple pies that make the men's folks' mouth water," the Queen said. "Pies made from apples like this." She pulled the brilliant red apple from her basket and showed it to Snow White. The girl was hesitant, but the Queen used every persuasive bone in her frail old body to convince her to take a bite. Snow White looked enraptured by the apple, and she reached out to take it and pull it close to her lips. Then suddenly the Queen found herself attacked by what felt like a horde of bats. But they couldn't be bats. It was mid-morning. She felt the creatures pecking at her and swatting her with their wings, talons tearing at her skin, and vicious beaks reaching hungrily for her eyes. She was lashed by feathers. Birds! She was being attacked by flocks of them. She raised her arms to block them and dropped the apple. Snow White quickly came to her rescue. Emerging from the cottage and chasing the birds away, the queen quickly grabbed for the apple and checked it to assure that it wasn't damaged in any way. Snow White came to her side and apologized. The queen seized the opportunity to be invited into the cottage by complaining of a weak heart and expressing the need to sit down. Snow went over to the far side of the cottage to fetch the queen some water, and as she did so, the queen pulled out the apple and formulated her plan. Then something unexpected. She couldn't do this to her little bird. Her heart ached. Weakness. She shoved it away. She buried the impulse deep within herself along with her grief and focused on the matter at hand. And because you've been so good to poor old Granny, I'll share a secret with you. This is no ordinary apple. It's a magic wishing apple, the queen said. A wishing apple? Snow White asked. The queen got up from her seat and started moving towards Snow White with the apple extended before her. Yes, one bite and all your dreams will come true. Really? The queen moved in closer. Yes, now make a wish and take a bite. Snow looked apprehensive and began to back away as the queen advanced towards her with the apple extended. There must be something your little heart desires. Perhaps there's someone you love? The queen asked. Well, there is someone, Snow replied. I thought so, the queen laughed. Old Granny knows a young girl's heart. Now take the apple, dearie, and make a wish. The queen thrust the apple into Snow White's hand. She smiled and nodded in encouragement as she watched the girl consider the apple. Then the girl wished. She wished for all the things the queen once had. For love, for a handsome prince to ride in on horseback and carry her away to his castle, to make her his wife. But she also wished for something the queen knew she herself could never have. That was to live happily ever after. The queen watched, wringing her hands in anticipation. Quick, don't let the wish grow cold, she said, and with that, Snow White sunk her teeth into the most beautiful, ripest apple she'd ever seen. Oh, I feel strange, she said. The queen watched in anticipation as the effects of the poison set in. Snow wavered to and fro. The queen rubbed her hands together and rocked back and forth, waiting until she would again be fairest of all. And then, finally, Snow White fell to the ground. The bitten apple rolled from her hand, and the wicked, wicked queen burst into maniacal laughter that could be heard throughout the kingdom. As in response, a loud thunderclap resounded from above, and the sky opened up with a shower of pouring rain. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, like and subscribe, and don't forget to ring that notification bell to keep up to date on all the new magic. Have a magical day.